and really building high impact practices into the architecture, into the infrastructure of student learning and curricular design and institutional community citizenship, and building those infrastructures in different ways across different kinds of programs and institutions. Today's panelists are exciting exemplars of that kind of integrative infrastructural mission. They are exemplars themselves. And just to echo what was said in the first panel, it's really important in this period of higher education stress and of political polarization to know that there's kind of a vibrant landscape of innovation and architecture building of civic learning across institutions. You're going to hear from three of those exemplars. But we're going to begin with a little bit of the research that underlies that claim about the importance of HIPs, of high impact practices. Derek Price will be presenting that. He's an educational researcher and consultant, the principal and founder of DVP Practice, and he'll give us a snapshot of research he's been involved with on the impact of HIPs on civic capacity building and on student success. That he'll be followed by Chris Minix, who's a professor of English and director of the Blazer core curriculum at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And then Bridget Trogdon, who's dean of undergraduate education at American University, but who's also worked to advance engaged learning and curricular redesign at several other universities as well. And finally, Byron White, who's associate provost for urban research and community engagement at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where he also directs Urban Core. Core stands here for community-oriented research and engagement. Each of them is going to give us a brief account, first of this key research, and then of ambitious efforts to build high impact practices into the architecture of student learning and curricular design and community engagement. And as they speak, please everyone do weigh in with comments and questions in chat. I will pay attention to that. And we plan to reserve as much time as possible to hear from you and to respond to your thoughts and questions. So with that, let me get out of the way and pass the mic to Derek to start us off, and then ask each of our speakers, without my reintroducing them, to take up the mic in turn. Derek, go for it.
Thank you, David. And thanks in advance, Michelle. I think you're going to drive my handful of slides that I have to share with all of you today. I also want to thank Carol Gary Schneider for inviting me to share some research that we've been doing over the last several years around high impact practices, and to the CLDE Coalition in general for elevating up this research and incorporating one aspect of it in the recent report that's just been released. The studies that I'm going to share with you, and then we can go into my headline slide. The studies I'm going to share with you today come from a project that I did, my team did with the Lumina Foundation several years ago on high impact practices, and covers two different sets of data. One data is from Tennessee and covers two-year community colleges, and another set of data covers four-year institutions in three states, Georgia, Montana, and Wisconsin, and uses survey data from the National Survey of Student Engagement. Both of these studies were projects that Lumina funded around enhancing high impact practices and making them more equitable for students in these systems and in these institutions. And I'm going to share the results of those studies with you today. Next slide, please. The first study is in Tennessee, and the Tennessee study uses administrative records. Now, Tennessee, during this project, created a series of taxonomies that they use to formalize high impact practices system-wide, so that a college could identify a class that met those standards in the taxonomies that were set up through their participation, to know that a student was actually experiencing a high quality, high impact practice. So we were able to get access to administrative records at 5 community colleges, covering 19,000 first-year community college students in Tennessee, to look at whether or not their participation in high impact practices led to higher outcomes on a number of measures that are widely utilized among community colleges to determine progress towards credential attainment and transfer. And as you can see in the table in front of you, the analysis that we did were quite positive. The darker bar on the chart reflects students who participated in high impact practices in their first year, and the lighter bar are those that did not participate. This is not a causal study. This is a correlational study for those of you that are interested in those types of things, but we were looking at a comparison of outcomes between these two groups of students. And as you can see across the board, participation in high impact practices is associated with higher retention, higher credit completion, and higher completion of key English and math courses that are necessary for students to make progress towards credential and transfer. Now, not shown on this page, though, is information about specific kinds of high impact practices, such as the first year experience and undergraduate research. And these were consistently associated with large benefits across all of these outcomes. And then the third point I want to make here is simply that service learning was connected most strongly with academic benefits, particularly for Hispanic students in Tennessee. Now, across the board, I will say that the benefits that I'm showing you in the aggregate right here were quite large for Black and Hispanic students. And also, although 25 and older students, adult students, are less likely to participate in high impact practices, at least in this particular study, their gains were also especially large in Tennessee. Next slide, please. Now, the next study I want to share with you, you might be familiar with this chart. It was actually in the CLDE report that was just released. I think it's on page 16, if I have my memory correct. And this is a study using data on 28,000 students from the National Survey of Student Engagement. It involves 15 four-year institutions across Georgia, Montana, and Wisconsin. And we are trying to analyze the relationship between participation in high impact practices and learning gains. Now, those of you familiar with the NSE know that they ask respondents to assess the extent to which their experience contributed to knowledge, skills, and personal development in a variety of domains, including those that are academic or more practical in nature or related to personal and social development, for example. And what we did here is we used the survey respondents, the 10 questions that are asked of survey respondents around academic and practical gains to assess the analysis of high impact practices on those gains. Now, I should say in this study, each of the three scale measures the average student's reported scores across the relevant learning gains, and we used factor analysis to load the learning gains into the academic and practical groupings, respectively. Now, for all the analyses that were conducted, the perceived learning gains are mean-centered for the technical people in the world and standardized. So basically, each scale has a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. And what this allowed us to do was interpret the resulting coefficients as standard deviation differences or effect sizes. So the percentages that you see on here are, in essence, percentages of a standard deviation, and that's what they represent. Now, I want to emphasize here in particular a shout out to my colleagues, Jessa Lewis-Valentine and Haisheng Yang, who were primary researchers on both of these studies. But I think this one is particularly rigorous and they deserve some acclaim for their good work. Now, next slide, please. There are some scholars that indicate that, oh, I missed that next slide. Okay, let's go back. That's okay. I want to draw your attention to the service learning bars. In a prior draft, I had that circled because there are some scholars that believe that an effect size greater than 0.20, 20% in this chart, should be considered policy relevant. So I simply want to draw your attention to service learning in this study because it met that threshold of policy relevance in this study across 15 institutions in 4 states. Okay, final slide. So what does this all mean? We're trying to make sense of high impact practices. And the first is just a reinforcement, a validation of what a lot of researchers have found, which is simply that high impact practices do improve students' academic and practical learning gains and increase their educational progress towards credential. And this is especially true for Black and Hispanic students and students aged 25 and older, which are often considered our adult students returning to colleges. Now, in the data that we had, service learning, particularly in the NESE data, is the most common high impact practice experienced by students, and it is associated with the largest boost to learning gains, especially large for adult students 25 and older. So what does this all mean for civic engagement? Well, I think what it means, or what I'm suggesting it means, and I'm sure the panelists that follow me will talk about this in way more substantive detail, is that if we can embed high impact practices within what might be called a civic engagement educational infrastructure, this can be a key strategy for equitable access and opportunity, not only in terms of making sure a broader, diverse group of students are experiencing these practices that yield better academic outcomes and learning gains, but also so a broad, diverse group of students have the opportunity to be more engaged in civic engagement, education, democracy building, and the importance of those things as we move forward. And I think that's what our panelists that follow are going to focus in on. So thank you very much for allowing me to share these studies. I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Derek. This is great. Chris, over to you. You're still muted, my friend.
So sorry about that. Thanks so much. My name is Chris Minix. I am the director of the core curriculum at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I wanted to touch on the idea of infrastructure as well and talk just a little bit about how we have implemented civic learning and at the level of infrastructure in our core curriculum. David, you in a recent article had on your paradigm project had talked about how the crisis in higher education is systemic, but the innovations are often piecemeal. And we see the value of general education and things like the recent AACU report on what employers value in higher education by Ashley Finley, but a lot of times we still suffer from the silo effect. And one of the things that's interesting to us as at the level of core curriculum is that we've realized that the problems that we face in our city of Birmingham, Alabama, and in the world are not piecemeal, and they don't line up with disciplinary silos very well. An example of this in our community recently was vaccine hesitancy. The science was rock solid on this issue. RNA vaccines are amazing, but the hesitancy of people to actually take them pointed to the need for a broad interdisciplinary coalition to address a problem like that. So for us, liberal learning, civic learning, and really thinking about the role that they play in general education are not only, issues of thriving and suffering, but even life and death in our society. And that's pretty dramatic when you're talking about general education, and I get that. I feel like I bring ice to a dinner party a lot of times. It's useful, but not very, it's no mac and cheese. So in the time I have remaining, I'm just going to try to convince you a little bit of what we've been doing at UAB, how it connects to this vision of civic education and how it connects to high impact practices. So we've done a lot, but one thing I want to focus on is an initiative that we have called the City as Classroom. Birmingham is a historic city. We are one of the central cities in the civil rights movement and the human rights movement. So we live in a really fascinating place. And part of what we have done as a core curriculum is to bring the city into the core curriculum in a way that really leverages high impact practices like service learning, undergraduate research, and collaborative assignments. And we've done that through creating a required course in the core where students have to be immersed in the city and they have to study how a particular problem, issue, or opportunity can be addressed from a variety of different disciplinary standpoints. So the best way for me to tell you about this is to give you some examples of this and what these courses look like. So all UAB students take these courses, even our online students who are studying in places like Nebraska, they have to learn something about Birmingham as they go through. And here are a few examples. A course in English called Writing in Birmingham that has students working in the city archives to conduct research on the history of Birmingham civil rights journalism. An urban geology course that has students delving into issues of soil quality and their impact on local communities. a math course called Data Dive into Birmingham that has students working with data sets on issues central to our community's life, including sustainability and public health. A course called Taxation and the Working Poor, an economics class that has students looking at the relationship between local and state sales taxes and their relationship to the working poor in Birmingham. Health in the City, a nursing course that looks at the social determinants of health in Birmingham. Sustainability in Birmingham, a public health course that looks at health impacts of sustainability initiatives. And another one that I love is Magic City Data Collective, a physics course that pairs students with community organizations and helps those organizations use data to improve health, ecology, and resource distribution in their communities. These few examples, I hope, illustrate a few things. One, and these are just a few. We have 30 courses from 21 departments and 8 different schools at our university that are city's classroom courses. But one, they illustrate for me that core curricula and courses like this require cross-disciplinary effort. They are wonderful incubators for cross-disciplinary collaboration. And that the courses like this use HIPs, such as undergraduate research or service learning, not as part of an add-on to the general education curriculum, but as central to addressing the problems that those courses take up. Now, there's a few other things I'm happy to discuss. We have a micro-credentialing program called a flagging program where students get micro-credential for high impact practices and for things like justice, sustainability, civic engagement. But I wanted to end with just 2 takeaways. And the first is that the complexity of our society and the problems that we face make courses like this by nature interdisciplinary. But the other is that the silo effect in general education can be overcome, and that general education is one of the best places to leverage the power of civic learning. And the thing that I will end with is we have gone from this being a one required course in the core curriculum to when faculty were to a point where faculty were so engaged with this that when they were asked to choose the topic for our next quality enhancement plan, they chose the city as classroom. And so we've moved from general education to the entire undergraduate curriculum being connected to this particular issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. That's really inspiring. Bridget. You're still muted. We're not hearing you. Okay.
All right, I'm seeing if it works that time.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I had to run another meeting right before this and it messed with my settings. So whoever had that on your Zoom bingo card, you just got a space. So glad to be able to talk to you all. I'm Bridget Trogdon, Dean of Undergrad Education at American University. So I've been here about 15 months, but this is year 20 for me as a professor. And I think I'm kind of like Chris. I can't not dabble in gen ed. We actually have a group name for people like us for the gen ed peeps. So the Jeeps, GEEPS. There's a hashtag out there somewhere. But, you know, I'm really inspired by these ideas of every major, every degree, you know, and a really good place to do that is in general education. And I won't go into huge detail on all of this, but even you know, the idea of American education coming from the Jeffersonian ideal, the reason that American education is such a distinctive is that component of general education, because we need educated citizens to run our democracy. And so the American education is extrinsically linked with democracy. And I think we all know it. So at American University, we have a general education curriculum that isn't new. The new curriculum rolled out about 6 years ago, but the way that I'm kind of thinking about it with where we are now in the civic life initiative that I think if you heard our new president, John Alger, talk about, it's just such a great thing for us, such a great piece of our mission. But, you know, I'm thinking about tightening, you know, so the parts of the AU core, if you think of a weaving and there are different components because courses aren't just, you know, the old school cafeteria tray of, you know, eat your vegetables, eat your peas, you know, that square pizza that was kind of gross but kind of delicious at the same time. You know, we need to be able to have all of these pieces interconnected. And so if you think of a general education as woven together over time, sometimes those strands get a little loose. And so how do you tighten those back in? And so this is something I'm really interested in. And, you know, I think Chris was talking about some things that are new. Our curriculum isn't new at the moment. We've been through a full class, they've graduated, but how can we tighten some of those strands and move these ideas of civic learning and democratic engagement from implicit to explicit? And, you know, so some of the things that are in our AU core, and the link is in the chat if you want to look at them, is, you know, there are components that are woven throughout the college experience. So it's not even just first year, you know, a lot of different places where our students are engaging. And in the first year, the students do have a complex problems seminar. So that is a first year seminar, a kind of traditional reading, writing, thinking. You know, I love this idea of city as classroom. We're located in Washington, D.C., one of the best classrooms you have in the world for, you know, democracy. So our students can, you know, go on a number of different co-curricular excursions as part of their complex problems classes. And the complex problems all need to have at the heart an interdisciplinary, just complex problem, wicked problem, global challenge, whatever term that you prefer. And with those learning outcomes for the course, they explicitly have diverse perspectives. So students are examining complexity, awareness of norms and biases. So those start to come into issues of self and other, practicing civility through argumentation and intellectual exchange, learning outcomes that are crucial for democracy. Integrative learning is also part of those courses. We have another kind of first year seminar course that is being re-envisioned a bit as AU Encounters, to have a civic focus where students are analyzing works that have intersections on race, identity, and power. They're questioning intersections of social identities that do include, you know, ethnicity, gender, class, sexuality. In this case, in the spring, that course is going to be focused on James Baldwin. And I think of it, it's not a James Baldwin class, but it's like James Baldwin is the jazz, you know, so the kind of the common melody that you can pick out throughout as the students are engaging in inquiry. It's also the 100th anniversary of James Baldwin. There's an exhibit at the Smithsonian. There are so many kind of co-curricular things that we can do, as well as multimedia in the course. You know, and then the civic engagement also goes throughout the undergraduate curriculum. You know, we do have some components that seem more disciplinary related in nature. So, you know, a cultural identity requirement where students are examining norms, biases, forms of representation, power, how power shapes ideas. Those are incredibly important kinds of learning outcomes to support democracy. All students have ethical reasoning courses, which can be in a number of different disciplines. They take a course in socio-historical inquiry, the learning outcomes there, which are on the website. You know, they include examining ideas, problems, policies, and institutions over time, how those change, evaluating evidence and sources, and developing arguments and understanding the historical connections of things. And, you know, there's a lot of research on our current college students that sometimes they just want to get in and fix problems, and that innovative entrepreneurial thinking is fantastic, but they also need to understand where we were before. So, you know, throughout the AU core, there are so many different threads that connect in with these themes of democracy. And so we're working on connecting them. One other thing I just wanted to say, and I really liked how Derek was talking about this, you know, I've also published a lot on high impact educational practices and where they happen. And service learning is, of course, the great equalizer. But if you look at, you know, at your own institution who engages in high impact educational practices, it's often students later on in their academic career. Sorry, I had a timer and now it's decided to let everybody know I had a timer on. So anyway, I got about 30 seconds.
Take the time you need.
Yeah, I know, right? So if you look at when your students are engaging in high impact educational practices, it's often, junior year, senior year kinds of things. And why are we saving the good stuff for later? And I love that information that Derek showed for the earlier students, especially at 2-year colleges, and what's happening there. And so, we have at AU connected with core a number of high impact practices that I'm just calling like the hippest of the hip, because they're no longer clean, like where there's only one. So we might have, we have a program that's just been re-envisioned that's a DC Community Impact Scholars Program. So in their first year, students are involved in a living learning community that does community-based research, right? That's 3 hips. We have the ability for students to be admitted and immediately do an internship or a study abroad. That's a program called AU Cornerstone. So they're a living learning community with study abroad and internship. So being able to have this, this intersection of the hips is also something that can give students a greater engaged learning opportunity and contributes to democracy. And that's my time. So thank you, David.
Thank you, Bridget. I have all kinds of thoughts of the way your and Chris' comments are in dialogue with one another. And Byron, expand the dialogue. Over to you.
Thank you. And you know what? I hit my mute button early. Sorry, Chris. Sorry, guys, and Bridget for showing you up, but I had to do it. Thanks, David. Listen, unlike my colleagues, Urban Core is, we're not responsible for the curriculum. We really are a unit that is in place within academic affairs to facilitate engaged scholarship. We see ourselves as kind of the hub of our engaged scholarship ecosystem at UNC Charlotte. Our strategic plan has a very ambitious goal of co-producing transformative solutions to societal issues and challenges. So we see ourselves as kind of the consciousness and the infrastructure to help the university achieve that bold aspiration. So primarily what we're doing is supporting engaged scholars and units and instructors as they put HIPs in place. And we do have a fairly new core curriculum. It's called the Charlotte Core. It has 4 core competencies, one of which is engagement across perspectives. And within that are 4 themes around global and local engagement. So we really focus there in our support to faculty. But what I thought I would do to complement what Chris and Bridget talked about and really giving some great insight into the infrastructure that's creating and developing and enabling curriculum is to kind of speak to how a unit outside of that particular responsibility is supporting this work. And many of you may find yourselves in some kind of role similar. So there are 6 quick things. I'm going to run through them quickly, and any of you want to come back to through the Q&A, we can. I realize that not all of us are kind of equipped to do all these things, either because where we're placed in the institution or capacity, but just to give some ideas. So one way of really being engaged in this work in HIPS is just being in the room where it's happening. The faculty, of course, are driving the creation of curriculum. Our Director of Engaged Scholarship participated in the creation of the Charlotte Core, and really as almost a consultant around the benefit of community engagement and high impact practices, and also the execution of those, from identifying partners to allowing time to move forward. And so it may not always be that those of us who aren't directly involved in curriculum development would see ourselves in the role, especially say gen ed creation, but to really find a way to bring value in those rooms is critical. A second thing is providing a kind of, we inventory and facilitate the broad networks among units that dispatch students into the community. And that's inside and outside of academic affairs. So that's at athletics as well as honors programs. It's undergraduate research and student affairs. And what we found happens in that network is that folks on the academic side are sort of stimulated by some of the kind of efforts that go on outside of academic affairs, where they're not the same kind of constraints, but there's often some different kinds of imagination and opportunities. And so really building a broad network across those lines, we found, has energized curriculum development. A third one is to create an infrastructure that really values that work. So we have a pathways credentialing program where students move along a continuum of connect, cooperate, collaborate in their experiences around engagement, whether curricular or co-curricular. What's interesting is that they have to do certain practices, but also learning modules that have been created. And these are videos created inside and outside the university. And faculty, most of our students come through faculty courses because faculty want to use the learning modules in their curriculum. And so by creating just sort of that support and those assets, we have been able to support faculty around high impact practices. Another one is just helping to quantify and identify engaged courses. We found that our service learning tag was faculty weren't using it, or they found it burdensome. Meanwhile, there were a lot of faculty doing engaged work, engaged instruction that we weren't capturing. Or we would so broadly label everything that's a practicum or internship as engaged that we were missing, over counting. So we've really spent a lot of time and have created a community engagement tag for courses that's broader than service learning, but not everything that simply has the word community in it. And that's been very helpful in supporting this work among key faculty. I have two more. A fifth one is, and this is one I think we know, but really providing faculty development opportunities. So we work with the Center for Teaching and Learning. We work with the Center for Research Excellence and sort of say to them, hey, we will bring into your faculty development efforts a focused community engagement kind of effort. And so we have something called Core Series that highlights engaged scholarship, but mostly it's really identifying those faculty who do it well and allowing them to, giving them a platform and a stage to share with their colleagues how they're doing the work. And finally, I would say a sixth thing we can do is to nurture external partners. So a lot of work is internal. What we have something called Core 25, and these are 25 community-based organizations, all with a focused geography or population that we nurture. We handhold that group. We facilitate their work with the university by helping to prepare them. And so what they do is they provide a high quality environment for students that come their way and faculty that come their way around their curriculum or research. And they require a high level of engagement in return. And so it elevates their game, if you will, from the outside in. So those are just some of the things we do outside the direct curriculum creation apparatus.
This is all really inspiring. I'm about to name in a very bullet pointy way a couple things I heard and to ask a question. But let me encourage folks in this breakout session to, since there are more than I can see you on one screen, to raise your hand if you want to ask a question or make a comment, and we'll have plenty of time for that. So a couple things that I heard is the importance of the core as one site, but not the only site for this kind of educational redesign work. And the question of how you move beyond the core is one that lingers for me. Another is, to state the obvious, the relationship between wicked complex problems and relationships with interdisciplinarity as a mode. And then I would also say there's a wonderful complementarity between the kind of curricular focus of Chris's and Bridget's description of the infrastructure work they're doing, and Byron's description at UNC of how you build community partnership and engaged scholarship that are shaped by and shape the curriculum, but aren't the curriculum, and in fact work work with units beyond the academic units. I want to put that out there as things for us to talk and think about. Here's my question, and I warn my colleagues, this is a different question from the one that I thought I might ask you. I was really struck in Lenore Radicchio's comments in the first session about her naming of barriers to this kind of generalizing of civic learning, and she named them really well. But maybe even more importantly, the need for institutional supports. So I'd like you not to talk about the barriers that you are facing, but about what kind of institutional supports are needed to do the kind of infrastructure building, the networking, the systems building that all of you are doing. If you were talking to your presidents and provosts or to others, what is needed to support and sustain this work? And Byron, since you talked a lot about systems practices, let me start with you and we'll go in reverse order.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a couple, and these are all, I feel like, my meetings today. One, sort of on the inside, really is recognition. That is, we really try to make heroes of the faculty who are doing this work and doing it well, and doing it at a high level through a number of efforts. One thing we do, for instance, we co-host with colleges something we call the community engagement showcase, and it is literally a program where we help a college. We work through the deans. We help a college identify the engaged scholars in their college, both research and curriculum, and we do these 5-minute presentations of the work. They invite the community partners they are working with to this event. And it's amazing because, one, it highlights for their colleagues, mostly, because it's very much college-based, what's going on. And it celebrates the partners, and it just elevates the work. So I don't think we can, I think that's the inside game we can do. The other one, though, and I'll just touch on a little bit more, really is around the nurturing of community partners. I think a lot of times we sort of go, let's find a community partner and send our students there, or faculty go there. And especially let's find those community partners who do this work, really understand the university, or and we overburden that organization where it's really not mutual. We're asking them to help us out. They might get something for it. So we are always looking at broadening the pool of partners. We actually have 7 criteria we use for identifying these partners that we deliberately nurture. Our unit sort of says, the university's engagement with these partners will be episodic. A grant comes along and they're pulled in, and then the grant's over. Something happens, a student's there, and then the semester's over. And so our goal is to have an ongoing relationship where we're engaged in what they're doing. We make sure at their annual event, someone from the university is there. And what we found is that we can grease the skids a little bit for those faculty members that say, hey, I would do this, but with whom? And we're able to say, not just here's a community partner, but here's someone ready for you because they've been at this a while, and we've helped set them up. So I think those are 2 sort of inside-outside versions of things we could do.
Thanks, that's great. I want to say, Adio, I see your question, but let's hear from Chris and Bridget about this question.
Yeah, sure. I can be pretty fast. I totally agree with everything that Byron's saying. Recognition matters, nurturing community partners matters, especially in the service learning piece. And if once you start seeing the data on impacts of service learning, and then also working with students, which doesn't show up in data, right? But the people that you work with, you see the impacts there, and being able to have good community partnerships, not just like that go on for a while, to have that nurtured relationship, the anchor institution kinds of philosophy really matter. I think that with, what David was asking, the need for institutional supports, I think there is recognition, but we also need to be able to know what's going on and who is not at the table. And, I worked on this a lot at my last institution, and I actually just pulled the paper up that we wrote that like we were able to look at student records across, well, I won't go into the whole depth, but being able to get information that then led to a $500,000 grant from the USDA to work with students in a specific program who weren't engaging as much in research and internships, and being able to have that was real resources that impacted real students. That's a grant that just ended. Being able to disaggregate our data on study abroad in the College of Business. And then when the College of Business dean was doing fundraising, could do targeted fundraising for, the students who otherwise would not be able to participate in study abroad. So, I think that the institutional supports need to go into understanding what is equitable with high impact educational practices. And that's one place that, I think it is important to have in the curriculum. And I think it's important to have in the general education curriculum, because those are for everyone, kind of going back to that central theme of every major, every degree in credit bearing activities.
Thanks, Bridget.
Yeah, I'll chime in. I agree with both Bridget and Byron. I think for me, there's two things that I really wish that when I'm working with higher administration that have been helpful. One is that there is recognizing that there are going to be resources that you don't know you're going to need right now. For example, with City's Classroom, the thing that really caught us off guard was we've got a transportation issue. We've got access issues for students that have ambulatory issues. We've got city streets that are closed and students need to get in those buildings. So recognizing that even though a curriculum is launched, that curriculum is going to have emergent needs that have to be funded, and that's not going to ever be able to be reflected on a proposal for it, because they're going to emerge in real time. The other thing that I would say that is important for us is also helping them recognize the resources that they have in faculty and students. I think for us, part of the importance of our work has been recognizing that faculty were doing this long before we named it. And so understanding that work has been going on, and that we have these amazing faculty champions that can help us understand, for example, that there are certain communities that want to work with us and certain communities that don't. In certain communities in Birmingham, we are known as UAB, the university that ate Birmingham. And we have groups that don't want us in their community. And that there are, and so faculty who have been involved, who have been working within our community groups for decades, are a resource that I think administration needs to be able to recognize and to value and bring in and support through things like course releases and other things that give them the ability to pursue that work.
We have just a couple minutes left. Let me point to two questions that have come up in chat and ask my colleagues to answer them or speak to them really crisply. One is specifically for Byron. Can you share a little bit more about the definitions and language used in the tagging and designation process? The other question from Sharon Welch is, in nurturing community partners, do you work with certified B corporations, social enterprises, diverse forms of businesses, but with a common goal of economic systems and practices that are also socially responsible? So Byron, let me ask you to speak really crisply to those questions, with my apologies, and then Chris and Bridget, if you want to speak to the second one in particular.
Sure, I'll be real quick. So in general, the way we've thought about the community engagement tag is, so we think of engagement across various types of research and curriculum, service learning, action research, all of that on 3 levels: connect, cooperate, collaborate. And they tend to, we differentiate those by 3 factors: the level of reciprocity with the community, the degree to which the engagement involves community and its co-production and execution, the scholarly impact as measured by the scholarly field, and the community impact as determined by the community partner.
We had to rename all of our diversity offices, but if you have diversity offices, they can also plug you in really well. So awesome.
Thanks.
We are going to extend a couple more minutes. I know there's a really good conversation happening in here, as there is in other rooms, which is wonderful. So we are going to take a break in a few minutes, but we can all hang out here as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Really appreciate that. If there aren't questions from the audience, I've got one more that I do want to ask about, which is all of you have talked about ways of balancing a commitment to students and the student outcome benefits of HIPS and civic learning with a commitment to the community benefits. And I want you to speak, and this comes out of my own experience leading a community engagement center, about potential tensions between those, ways in which you have to navigate the benefit to students with the benefit to community relationship building.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in, because these can be difficult. And so in my Dean of Undergrad Education role, I see every time that a student needs an exception to an academic policy. And routinely, I will see a student who is asking to withdraw after a deadline from a service learning course because they have financial, they have less financial support from their families, and they need to work more hours and are not able to do as many commitments outside of class. And things like research, service learning, volunteerism, community engagement, internships, all of those kinds of things, when they're unpaid, do take a toll on our students with the highest financial need. I don't know the way around all of that. There are institutions that, including my own, who are prioritizing grants and paid work, institutional grants, to let students have access to high impact practices, if that otherwise they would not be able to do. And I think that's the right thing to do. But funders, Lumina, right? If any of you, others have funding to be able to help our students to be able to have equitable access, we definitely need it. That's just one example.
Yeah, I'll speak to just on what Bridget was saying. We've made a concerted effort to really leverage work study around engagement. I know, and we're looking at some campuses, and might be many represented here, that are really doing a great job there. We haven't been, but we do have an initiative focused around work study students and their engagement to address the issues that Bridget raised. The other thing I just want to say about the tension is, so this has just been my experience. We try to start with the community need, not need, with here's what I think. Communities in general don't want you to meet their need. First of all, they don't want to be known by their needs, and they don't want it fixed. What they want to do is produce a solution to the challenges that they have. And so we really start with the solution the community is working on. Like, what's the table? I will tell students, everything you're trying to think of, someone in the community is trying to figure out. If you can figure out the table where that's being discussed and join the table, that's going to be a great experience. Students are all about that. They want their time to produce some tangible solution. They want to have impact. And so once we start there, I find solutions are students adapt to that. It's faculty who struggle, right? Who have a fixed thing to do and to tell. And I think sometimes struggle more with the tension there. But when students drive it, they go, yeah, you know what? That's what you want? Oh, that's how it will work? Cool, let's work on that. And so I think some of this is really letting student innovation sort of help in the co-production of efforts, and I find students get it.
Veronica, you have your hand up to speak to this, I think. And you're muted.
Yes, I just wanted to observe that at least one institution that I'm aware of actually organizes the student experience as a capstone, an interdisciplinary capstone. And there's a negotiation between the community-based organizations or other organizations that submit the problems that they're trying to work on, and there is a matching. So they work with a faculty member to craft a proposal about a solution-oriented approach, and then students sign in, and it's a required capstone. Students from various disciplinary backgrounds sign in, and they have, in essence, something of a contract to produce policy recommendations or an outcome for that organization. And that model, what it really does, it reduces the overhead on the organization to do the handholding. The faculty is responsible for that. Students in a group, they do learn how to work with each other, and they do learn how to write up the policy recommendations or whatever the outcomes are expected. And it seems to highly motivate students. And it's a similar model, I think, as Byron, you were indicating at that particular institution in Portland, Oregon. Its motto is "Let knowledge serve the city." And so it's all driven with that problem-solving approach. And it now has extended to rural areas as well, not limiting itself just to the city, but wherever the students and the faculty find partners in the community for solving problems.
And the institution is?
Portland State University.
Yeah, wonderful place. I'll just add one more comment about my own question, which is that students whose experience comes out of or is resonant with these communities, so that they're in effect they bring both community experience and academic goals, often act as kind of ambassadors, bridge builders, to enrich the sense of co-creation and dialogue. They're really important resources. I think we are about to close our extended breakout room. We have another minute or so. So let me just end by thanking Derek and Byron and Bridget and Chris for these really important presentations. They've really modeled for us the importance of HIPS for both for student learning, integrative learning, and integrative community benefit. And thanks to all of you for being part of this. And I'll see you in the big room.